Good evening, dear compatriots. Today is our last broadcast of 2023, and our guest today is National Democratic Alliance board member, Mr. Garo Yagnukyan. Thank you, Mr. Yagnukyan, for accepting our invitation and being our guest. And Mr. Yagnukyan, concluding the year, throughout the year, our attention was focused over the issue of Artsakh. And we were all hoping that the matter would have a favorable resolution for Armenia. However, we have what we have, and we lost another strategically and culturally important part of our homeland. In your opinion, what was the lesson that we had to learn from geopolitical point of view?
The lesson that I hope we learned quite well. I'm sure that a large segment of our population has learned that lesson, but of course there are still other segments that have not learned their lesson. And the lesson was that we cannot rely on an unreliable ally. In this case, the unreliable ally is Russia. Fortunately, our people, our Artsakh compatriots, have learned that lesson, but that lesson had cost them dearly. Armenians in Artsakh were the most pro-Russian group of people, and there are objective reasons for that, because they had no other choice. In other words, there was nobody else who was going to protect them. Their protection was going to be either Armenia proper or Russia. The West wasn't there yet. However, National Democratic Alliance, throughout this, since 2020, even before that, has been telling and hinting and saying it outright to our compatriots in Artsakh that they should turn with their face towards the West and, for example, request European observers, request UN peacekeeping forces, request that Russia lives up to the promise or the obligation that they have as so-called peacekeepers. Because by the November 9th agreement, that was between the tripartite agreement between Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Russia. Russia was supposed to guarantee the security of the Armenian population in Artsakh, which obviously they didn't do. Now, I think the lesson, the important lesson, which is not very obvious in this case, but which is also a very painful lesson, is that the West has let this happen. Why do I say the West has let this happen? The West could have interfered and not allowed the ethnic cleansing to happen. They could have.
Quite a dangerous statement that you are saying
now. Yes, I'm saying a dangerous statement, but this is my opinion. They could have, theoretically, they could have intervened. However, if they intervened, then Russia and Azerbaijan and Turkey would have started shouting that the West or the United States is being an aggressor, that you are going into somebody's house without an invitation. And that would have been a problem. So, in a way, the West said that they had no choice, because if they intervened, in order to save lives, in order to prevent the ethnic cleansing, they would have been labeled as aggressors. So they had no choice, in a way, to let it go. They knew exactly what was going to happen. They warned us what was going to happen. There were, just to bring it to your attention, there were hearings, congressional hearings, prior to the ethnic cleansing, prior to Artsakh that was emptied. They stated in no uncertain terms that what Aliyev was doing and we're just talking about the blockade at the time, that 9-month blockade. They labeled the 9-month blockade as genocide. And why did they call it genocide? They said that because ethnic cleansing hasn't occurred yet. It was, but when you starve a group of people, it's common knowledge, even a second grader knows that if you starve someone, they're going to die eventually. If they didn't die in 10 days, they're going to die in 10 months. But the death is the result of starvation. So if Aliyev was starving the Armenians in Artsakh, it was obvious that it was intended to starve them to death. And when you have an intention to starve someone to death, intention is the important word here, then that would be considered genocide. Genocide does not require death, contrary to what most people think. Most people think that you have to kill someone in order to have genocide. No, you don't have to kill. You have to have intention to kill. Mm-hmm. So that was raised at the congressional level by Ocampos and other experts, Phillips and others, Brownback. These were the people, the experts who spoke at those hearings, and they rang the warning bells. And if the Artsakh Armenians, or if the Armenian government had picked up the ball from those experts and taken it to the goal line, in other words, if they raised the alarm on their end, and by not just raising the alarm and saying that it's starvation, it's blockade, but by asking for help from the European Union, from United States, from the UN peacekeeping forces, then in that case, the West would have interfered and would have prevented the ethnic cleansing that happened later on. Now, they didn't do this, so the West, so what I was saying, it was risky, as you said, so the West had no choice but not to interfere, knowing very well what the result was going to be. But in a way, if I'm looking from the West's point of view, they say, look, you want to be with the Russians? Then suffer the consequences. These are the consequences. They have an obligation to protect you by agreement. We don't have an obligation with you.
For instance, over these 9 months, we never saw even a poster asking for UN peacekeepers.
Right.
They've been asking for Russian peacekeepers for help, etc., but never UN peacekeepers or US intervention. So this comes to say that people never risked to speak about or speak up about the things that are really important, and even though they understood that Russia gonna betray them. Is this about the fear?
I don't think they understood. I don't think they understood that Russia was going to betray them. I think if Armenians in Artsakh understood that, they would have definitely raised their voice. I think until the last minute, they had hoped that the Russians would protect them. Case in point, if you remember, they went mostly when the exodus was happening, when they were being ethnically cleansed, the first place they went to was the airport. And who was at the airport? The Russian peacekeepers. So even to the last minute, they had hoped that the airport with the Russian peacekeepers was the safety island that they could go and have protection. But even at that airport, which was completely controlled by Russian forces, was not safe for them. For that reason, they decided to leave. And only after they left and they arrived in Armenia proper did they realize that the Russians had betrayed them. Of course, there were people in Artsakh all along who knew that the Russians were going to betray them because they betrayed them during the 2020 war. It wasn't something new, but somehow because of the historical connection of Artsakh with Russia being stronger, and they being always a pro-Russian
But here I
part of
would
the
like to
Armenians.
separate Artsakh and Artsakh government from Artsakh and nation Armenians living in Artsakh.
I can't separate them at this point because the Armenians in Artsakh followed their leadership to whatever they said. As a reminder, if you remember when Ruben Vartanyan was temporarily the governor, I forgot his title, but he was the number one person in Artsakh, so to speak. He organized a mass rally where 40,000 people appeared at the square in Stepanakert.
Yeah.
40,000 people, that's 1/3 of the whole Artsakh population. 1/3. So if Artsakh people, 40,000, with the call of the government official, go to the square and not one single person raises the European Union flag or the UN flag or has a poster saying we need UN peacekeepers. If not one person does that, that tells me that the Armenians in Artsakh were very loyal to their government or to their government officials, who, if they said stand up, they would stand up. If they said lie down, they would lie down. And this is the problem with populations, with people, when they become very subjects to their government officials. In other words, they become subservient. They don't look if it's in their interest or not. They say, if the boss said, then I have to do. So whoever the boss is, they follow the boss's rules. And that's the problem. But I think now, coming back to your question, what lessons have we learned? I think our Armenians from Artsakh learned the lesson the hard way, the harsh way, the inhumane way, but they are feeling it on their personal level. They all feel what has happened to them. And of course, Armenians in general have learned that lesson too. And for that reason, and the statistics show that the pro-Russian sentiment in Armenia is down to very, very low levels, to the point that Moscow is very worried. And now Moscow is going to do whatever they can, try to entice Armenians back into their fold, try to lie to Armenians more by convincing them that Armenians have no other choice but to be with Russia. This is what they're doing right now.
Okay, making it hard with the last statement that you said, for a quite long time, the person that is occupied the position of Prime Minister of Armenia is trying to build an impression that he was changing the vector of political orientation towards West. However, Pashinyan once again does his signature flip-flop, and by not only participating the Eurasian Economic Union Summit in St. Petersburg, but also accepting in this way the organization's chairmanship. How would you interpret Pashinyan's consecutive reversal of foreign policy orientation, and what consequences do you think it might have for Armenia?
National Democratic Alliance has been saying it for a number of years already, that Nikol Pashinyan is a self-centered person who only cares about himself and his power and his position. So he will do anything to prolong his political life. And by political life, I don't mean his physical life, even though his physical life also depends on his political life. So he will do anything that will prolong his life. In our opinion, and we have reasons to believe that, we have actually know certain details, Nikol Pashinyan is not liked either by Russia nor the West. Well, let's call it Russia or the United States, and Europe as the West. He's not liked because Western politicians or Western culture thinking does not like liars. Unlike the Eastern cultures, where lying is deemed as someone who is a quick thinker, he's someone who can get away, and there are certain even words for that in Armenian, Russian, and so that Eastern culture, which, by the way, Turks, Iranians, Chinese, Russians, they all have this thing that they can lie to someone, and if they can convince you in their lie, they feel like they're big guys. They were able to
Superior.
they were able to fool you. Now, in a Western culture, Western Europe and United States, lying is the worst thing that you can do. A government official that lies in the West, they have criminal case against them for perjury, because a government official's lie is not like a child lying that they took a candy or not. It's a small thing, but when a government official lies, he affects the livelihood or the lives of the people in that country, because it is a direct connection between a lying official and how it affects the people. So lying in the Western culture is frowned upon, and a lying politician is someone who gets punished in the West, and they get punished very badly. I mean, the least that happens to them is they lose their job. The worst, they go to jail for perjury, as I said. Now, in this case, what we have in Armenia with Nikol Pashinyan, we have a perpetual liar. He is a non-stop liar. And he lies to the Russians and he lies to the West. So he lies everywhere. He lies to his own people, and it's not appreciated. It's not appreciated by Russia for a different reason. Not because the Russians are so moral that they don't like lying. No. With Russians is different, because Russians, they consider Nikol Pashinyan as their own agent. So when he's lying, he is deemed as a double agent. So automatically, in Putin's mind, Nikol Pashinyan is betraying him. So Nikol Pashinyan has a so to speak, a lover on the side. Putin is his husband, and he has a lover on the side. So to Putin, that's a personal insult that his subordinate, Pashinyan, is trying to play games with him. And what are the games that Pashinyan is playing? Is exactly how you started the question, is that he's trying to portray himself as someone who is pro-Western, as if he's changing the vector of the political orientation of Armenia towards the West. But that's all a game, that's all smoke and mirrors. He's not really doing that. And his last visit to Leningrad to participate in the Eurasian Economic Forum and accepting the chairmanship. By the way, the chairmanship is rotating, and it was Armenia's turn after Russia. Russia was the chairman last year, 23. In 24, starting January 1st, it's Armenia that's going to be the chairmanship. Now, and again, Pashinyan is a master spin doctor. He spins the facts, and he thinks that he is so conniving that he can fool everyone. But he's not fooling Russia, and he's not fooling the West. So what's going to happen now, and what is the consequences that Armenia is facing because of Pashinyan's so-called flip-flop. He goes once to Washington, then he goes to Moscow. He goes to Brussels, then he goes to St. Petersburg. So it's his east-west game. And it will come to an end. Coming to an end of this game is because I mentioned the West doesn't like liars. Russia doesn't like betrayers because they feel betrayed by their agent. Pashinyan is their agent, and he's betraying Russia by flip-flopping. But as I explained, Pashinyan's flip-flop is not ideological. He's not going to the West or to the East because he believes that that's the best thing for Armenia. As any official that has their heart in the Armenian people, they should move and they should act what's in the best interest of Armenia and Armenians. But Pashinyan is not doing that. So he's not appreciated that way also. See, the West could understand Pashinyan's move towards Russia if going towards Russia is in the best interest of Armenia. But it's not in the best interest of Armenia. So the West doesn't understand that, doesn't accept that. He is a liar. And the East, of course, as I said, the Russia is saying you're a betrayer. So he's doing this just to prolong his life. Now, what will happen if he continues with this flip-flop? Now the ball is, so to speak, is in the West's court. So the West has to act. The West has to act by putting pressure on Nikol Pashinyan and Armenia in overall, because the pressure that they put is not necessarily a personal pressure. A personal pressure, for example, if the West tells Nikol Pashinyan to forget about his millions in the New York banks. And they know, the West knows exactly where he has what. So that would be one personal pressure. But of course, there's the other pressure, which is the pressure on Armenia, which indirectly and directly affects on Pashinyan. For example, Armenia has been put on the blacklist of countries that support Russia in circumventing the sanctions. It's a well-known fact that how Armenian banks, Armenian businesses help Russia to obtain products and currency through Armenia. And that goes against the West's sanctions. Until now, the West has spared Armenia from punishment. Until now, the West has only a number of times pointed out to Armenia to stop what they're doing, that we know what you're doing, and Armenia stopped because they know that the West knows. Everybody knows, so to speak. So now the pressure on Armenia from the West will be more. The pressure will be in the form of not helping Armenia. The pressure will be in the form of not giving financial aid to Armenia. The pressure will be not giving loans through World Bank or International Monetary Fund. As you know, the foreign debt of Armenia has gone from 5 billion to 10 billion. The obvious reason why the foreign debt has gone up is because Armenia does not have enough income from taxes, because there's a lot of black market, there's a lot of stealing, there's a lot of corruption. So the budget of Armenia is not being filled, the coffers of Armenia are not being filled by the income from the taxation. So what does Armenia have to do? They have to borrow money. So during Nikol Pashinyan's time, our foreign debt had gone from 5 billion to 10 billion. Why do they need that money? To pay their salaries, to pay their rewards, the monthly rewards or whatever they pay to increase their income, personal income. And so the third thing, they will not give loans. So Armenia will be strapped for money. and then Pashinyan is under pressure because he has to do something. Military aid that has been starting to come to Armenia through India or France will stop. Instead of increasing it, it will stop. These are all types of pressure that the West will put on Armenia, which is not in the interest of Armenia. We are going to suffer because Nikol Pashinyan wants to hold on to his chair. That's what the West will do. And if that pressure comes to a point where Nikol Pashinyan flies to Washington or Brussels, that will be a consecutive flip-flop again. At that time, Russia will bring the pressure up again. What does Russia have as far as pressure? Well, we know that Russia controls almost everything in Armenia, but Russia also has, as a last resort, which we cannot rule out that they will do, as they did in October 27, where they shot 8 parliamentarians in parliament. In other words, they'll go into state terror tactics. Russia is recognized as a state terroristic state. Yeah. By the world, is recognized as terrorism. So they will do what a terroristic state does. And when I was talking about Nikol Pashinyan's political life, now we can also talk about Nikol Pashinyan's physical life, which will be cut short by Russia if Russia feels that that their pressure is not working. I think that's what's going to happen. I think West will be able to pressure Nikol Pashinyan and Armenia to the point where Nikol Pashinyan will flip-flop one more time. And I think at that point, Russia will go into their, so to speak, the terror tactic. And
yes. They did it not even once and
not
even to one person.
They will do a coup d'etat that way.
Coming to a brighter side of our interview, it is widely accepted that both in Armenia and abroad, that NDA, for all practical purposes, is the only true pro-Western political party in Armenia. NDA is also the only Armenian political entity that has conducted intensive lobbying activity in the United States through their partner, the Livingston Group, thus cementing their position as the leading pro-Western oriented organization. Can you please tell us in as much details as possible about NDA's lobbying activity in Washington?
Yes. We started our cooperation with Livingston Group in Washington almost a year ago, and we have seen quite a big results because of that. The obvious results were the 3 hearings that were conducted in the Congress. The hearings were concerning Artsakh, the pending genocide, and the possible ethnic cleansing, which already happened. At that time, we were warning that that's what's going to lead to, and it was voiced in Congress. We have had direct relationships already with a number of congressmen, both in Washington and in Yerevan. A congressional delegation was in Yerevan, and they met with representatives of National Democratic Alliance. I was one of the people present, and they met only NDA representatives and no one else. They did not even meet government officials, which is, in a way, a slap in the face of Nikol Pashinyan. So the West does things in a very subtle way, unlike the Russians. Russians do it straight. They do it with their what the Russians call X, the X politics. So the West gives you hints, makes you understand. You know, they look at you in a way that they're hoping that the people that they're dealing with understand those little nuances, you know, in direct statements and acts. But of course, they do understand. When I say they, I mean, in this case, Nikol Pashinyan does understand. And for that reason, now Nikol Pashinyan and Russia, his sponsor, consider NDA as their number one enemy. Interestingly enough, we're also considered number one enemy for the, not interesting enough, but also for the so-called pro-Russian contingency, what we call the fifth column, the ex-president Serge Sargsyan and Robert Kocharyan's clans. Now, they are the obvious pro-Russians. Nikol Pashinyan is the flip-flop pro-Russian who pretends to go to the West, but is not actually going to the West. So we are the only true pro-Western political organization or political party. Officially, NDA is a political party. We are the only true pro-Western organization. And as such, we have been noticed by the West. And the West knows that we are the flag bearer, so to speak, that we are in the front lines. They know very well that for the past 4 months, we are in the streets and we have the non-stop 24/7 sit-in at the Opera Square. This is all noticeable. And the fact that we're also working with the Livingston Group in Washington, it goes from the streets of Yerevan to the halls of Congress. So NDA is in both places, underground, grassroots, and in the political halls of Congress on the other hand.
And still being not the government representatives,
Right.
Doing much more than the government itself.
It's interesting you mentioned government because even the poorest countries in the world, and Armenia is not the poorest country in the world, even the poorest countries in the world have lobbying in Washington, D.C. And lobbying is not a cheap endeavor. It's expensive because it takes a lot of effort, a lot of connections, a lot of expenses involved in lobbying and being able to knock on doors and open doors. And Washington is full of lobbyists that work directly for foreign governments. For example, Turkey and Azerbaijan spend millions of dollars a year in hiring lobbying firms. And they don't just hire one, they hire a number of them. The reason why Turkey and Azerbaijan hire a number of lobbying firms is very simple math. There are so many lobbying firms in Washington. By the way, that is all public information in the United States because a lobbying firm has to be registered. They have to show who their clients are, how much they've been paid by their clients. So we know who Azerbaijan has hired. We know who Turkey has hired. And as I said, they hired a number. And the reason why they hire a number of them is because they want to have everyone tied up. Because there's this law, if a lobbying firm cannot represent conflicting sides. So if a lobbying firm represents Turkey, they cannot represent Armenia. Or any interest that goes against Turkey. They cannot represent Kurds, they cannot represent Greeks, because the Turks have hired them. So this is their tactic. They spend a lot of money. I mean, millions and millions a year.
They can afford themselves.
And because of that, we have an uphill battle. Now, what does the Armenian government do? Armenian government does nothing. They have not hired one single lobbying firm yet. They did it once for 1 month for a specific reason, and that was it. 1 month. And so we have no choice. NDA would have wished that what we're doing is being done by the Armenian government. But unfortunately, the Armenian government is not working in the interests of Armenia or Armenian people. So if they're not working in the interest of Armenian people, they would not want to hire a lobbying firm that will work for the interests of Armenia. They don't want that. So, and they can't have that lobbying firm work against the Armenian interests, because that becomes very obvious, even more obvious, that you hired someone who's going to do something against your interest. So they rather not hire. They rather not have any dealing with a lobbying firm, because if they don't do anything, you can only blame them for not doing anything. But the minute they hire a lobbying firm, they also will have to show that they're doing something. So that's the situation we're in. We were fortunate to be able to hire Livingston Group. And by the way, the Livingston Group in the late 90s and early 2000, they represented Turkey and Azerbaijan. But they haven't done that since 2000. I don't know exactly what year, but it's almost 20 years. They have no relation with Turkey or Azerbaijan. What a lot of Nikol Pashinyan's fake Facebook teams and also the pro-Russian teams, they, in this case, unfortunately, also the ARF, Armenian Revolutionary Federation, Dashtaktutun, have jumped on the bandwagon in criticizing NDA for dealing with a lobbying firm which has worked with Turkey or Azerbaijan 20 years ago. And they try to portray us as if we are pro-Turkish and pro-Azerbaijan just because the Livingston Group has worked with them 20 years ago. Now, for our viewers who don't know, lobbying firms are professional organizations. They are like attorneys or doctors. A doctor who treats Pashinyan also may treat me if I go to him for help. And he's not going to say, well, wait a minute, I treated Pashinyan, I can't treat you. Lobbying firm, on the other hand, just like an attorney, they can work with they have what I mentioned before, a conflict of interest, but the conflict of interest is only when they're doing it simultaneously, not 20 years later. Mm-hmm. A doctor does not have a conflict of interest. He can treat an Azeri soldier and an Armenian soldier next to each other at the same time. But attorneys and lobbying firms cannot do it at the same time. They can do one, they stop the relations with one, they can do with the other. This is how professional. So the same lawyer can represent you one day, and then 20 years later can represent the person who you were suing him at some other time for a different matter. So that is not a problem in professional circles like that. But I also would like to mention here a very important aspect about how the lobbying, and of course it's not just the lobbying, it's also how NDA has handled itself. Mm-hmm. Now, the Livingston Group can help us to open a door or to introduce us to a congressman. After that, the relationship that we develop with that congressman or with that State Department official is completely our doing. In other words, if we have a good relationship, it's because we have a good rapport with each other. Yes, the Livingston Group can say, you know, this is Susanna, Congresswoman from Alabama State, for example. But then if I have a good understanding, good relationship with Susanna, that's because we understood each other. It's because our interests coincide. And we were successful, I would say 100% of the time. Every single government official ex-diplomat or present diplomat or congressman, senator, or representatives from different think tanks that we were introduced to by the Livingston Group, we have a good rapport with them because they realized that we are honest, that we're interested in Armenia's best interests,
National interest.
that we are interested in the Armenian people's best interest. And they see that honesty, and they see that at our end, we are providing them with information, plans, strategic thinking as to how things should happen. And we also are able to convince them. By the way, doesn't take too much effort to convince, but you have to present it. We are able to convince them that what's in the best interest of Armenia at this time is also in the best interest of the United States. This is the important aspect, because lobbying is just, as I said, is opening doors. Then you have to convince whoever you're speaking to that my interests are same as your interests, because that's only when they would cooperate with you. Because if I present something that's in my interest, but it's not in the US interest, they would not cooperate. So we have that success. And this is thanks first for the Livingston Group for opening doors for us, and of course for our efforts in being able to show to those people and convince them that our interests coincide.
Thank you, Mr. Yernukyan, for being our guest and for your time and for your thorough answers. And I believe our listeners appreciate NDA's supports and achievements in lobbying for Armenian benefit. For information on how to support NDA for its lobbying efforts, please see the link below. Dear compatriots, I would also like to inform you of an upcoming event organized by National Democratic Alliance. A live fundraising telethon titled Statehood Secures Our Identity will simulcast from Los Angeles and Yerevan. It will broadcast on YouTube and other NDA social media sites on January 5th at 6 p.m. Los Angeles time, which is 6 a.m. Yerevan time on January 6th. Please tune on the Telethon from any corner of the world and show your support for NDA state building initiative with your financial support.